Some places carry stories that were never meant to be spoken aloud. Stories that were sealed away, buried under mud and moss, hidden in secret rooms, and protected by men who feared what the truth might do if it ever crawled back into the light. In the deep Louisiana swamps, where fog moves like a living thing and night feels thicker than sin, there is a record the church has denied for more than a century. But the truth has teeth. It does not stay buried forever. If you are ready to hear the beginning of what happened at the Convent of the Sacred Mercy, take a breath now. The darkness does not wait. Part 1. The Convent and the Man the Church Tried to Erase. Somewhere in the heavy cypress swamps of Louisiana, there exists a sealed archive that the church has never admitted to holding. 12 birth certificates. 12 dates between 1847 and 1852. All showing the same father. A man who was considered property, not a person. A man the church never wanted anyone to remember. In October of 1852, the Vatican received a letter that was locked under the highest level of secrecy. A level used only for matters that could shake the faith of millions. Witnesses later whispered that when the Archbishop of New Orleans opened the package from the Convent of the Sacred Mercy, he cried for 3 hours. Then he ordered every document to be burned. Every page. Every scrap of truth. But fire does not erase everything. Some fragments survived in private diaries, in fading ink, in stories whispered by people who refused to let those voices disappear. The official statement claimed the convent closed for financial reasons. Nothing unusual, nothing shocking, but 12 women who had taken vows there vanished from all church records on the same November night, as if they had never lived at all. No graves, no letters, no traces, not even a final prayer. Before this story continues, let me ask you something. If you are watching from Louisiana or anywhere in the Deep South or anywhere in America where old buildings still whisper at night, comment and tell me your city or state. This channel survives because of listeners like you who want the truth that history tried to bury. Hit subscribe because what I am about to tell you has never been revealed in full. Some truths are too dark to live in the open. The story of Sacred Mercy did not begin with scandal. It began with what people believed was an act of charity. Martinville sat like a small pearl of French culture 23 miles south of Opelousas. The Bayou Teche moved through sugar plantations and cypress trees that were so thick they swallowed the sun by late afternoon. French aristocrats had founded the town after fleeing the Revolution. By 1842 the people still lived with the old European manners. Fine clothing, proper greetings, elegant churches, all struggling against the Louisiana heat that humbled even the proudest family. At the center of town stood the Church of St. Martin de Tours. Its tall steeple rose above the flat delta land and shone like a beacon of faith. But at night, when the last bell faded, many claimed they heard distant drums from the slave quarters. Strange rhythms, old rhythms. That part of Louisiana lived in a mix of French, English, Spanish, and Creole. Outsiders often said the land itself spoke a language they could not understand. 3 miles north of town, down a narrow shell road that turned to deep mud after every storm, stood the Convent of the Sacred Mercy. Madame Céleste Dufosse, a wealthy widow with no children, had built it in 1838. She used her sugar fortune to create a house of God. Many said she hoped the money would buy her a peaceful entrance into heaven. The convent was meant to hold a small community of teaching sisters. They taught reading and writing to the daughters of rich planters. On Sundays they taught slave children about Christianity. People praised this as kindness, although nobody suggested that black and white children should ever sit together or learn the same lessons. This was Louisiana. Mercy had limits. The convent building looked different from anything else in the parish. It was built in the West Indies style and raised on brick pillars to protect it from flooding. Long galleries circled both floors, catching whatever breeze might pass through the humid air. Madame Dufosse insisted on tall French windows that opened from the floor to the ceiling. The walls were painted a soft, cool yellow, the color of her childhood home in Provence. The chapel held stained glass that came all the way from Lyon. There were 12 acres of land around the building. Gardens, vegetable plots, a cemetery with old iron fencing. At the far end of the property stood the kitchen, the laundry, and small buildings used for storage. 3 slaves lived and worked there. An older woman named Ellen, her daughter Margot, and a young man who would later become the center of every secret this story holds. His name was Matthias. The convent bought him in March 1845. He was 22 years old. Tall, strong, quiet. His skin was light, the result of generations of forced unions on the plantations. The bill of sale described him as healthy, skilled with tools, and easy to control. It did not describe his mind. It never mentioned that he could read. It never mentioned that he remembered every cruel thing he had seen. It did not speak of the scars on his back or the father he watched die. He worked in silence. He repaired the chapel roof after storms. He dug the drainage ditches that kept the land from drowning. He grew the vegetables that fed the sisters. He slept in a small room near the tool shed and ate his meals alone. He was told to make himself invisible unless called for. The sisters believed they treated him with kindness. But kindness without equality is not kindness at all. For 8 months, nothing unusual happened. The convent lived by the rhythm of old Catholic tradition. Prayers before dawn, teaching during the day, long silent nights. The 12 sisters were young women from respected families. They followed their vows with devotion. Mother Superior Thérèse Bergeron ruled the house with cold confidence. She came from one of the largest sugar families in the region. People said her will was stronger than steel. But something shifted in November 1845. Nobody could agree on when. Nobody wanted to admit how. The first person to notice anything strange was a neighbor, M. Laurent Guidry. His plantation bordered the convent on the east. He drank his morning coffee on his porch every day at 6 o'clock. He believed a man could judge the state of the world by watching his own land. One morning in April 1846, he noticed something he could not explain. One of the young sisters working in the herb garden seemed to have grown noticeably rounder in the belly. In June he saw 3 more who looked the same. And that was only the beginning. If you'd like, I can continue with part 2, create titles, descriptions, hashtags, thumbnails, or rewrite anything. Part 2, the births that should never have happened. Engaging hook. Some secrets rot from the inside. You can hide them under floorboards, lock them behind chapel doors, bury them in the swamp mud, and pray they never rise again. But secrets that begin with blood and fear do not stay quiet. They grow, they breathe, they demand to be known. This chapter of Sacred Mercy begins not with a scream but with a whisper at a dinner table. A whisper that should have ended the story right there. But it did not. It became the spark that set the entire convent on a path toward darkness so deep that even the church could not contain it. Part 2. A scandal the church could not face. By August, Laurent Guidry finally mentioned his strange observations to his wife Delphine during supper. The dining room was quiet except for the soft clink of silverware. When he spoke, she froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "You must be mistaken," she whispered. Her face turned pale, and she glanced at the closed door as if someone might be listening. "I know what I saw," Guidry said. 4 of them, maybe 5. All carrying the same condition. "They must be ill," Delphine insisted. "A swelling sickness. The heat affects people strangely here. You will not repeat this to anyone. To suggest such a thing about women who gave their lives to Christ is scandalous. It is blasphemy." He did not argue, but the pit in his stomach remained. A few days later, during confession, he brought the matter to Father Dominique Roussel. He spoke carefully, as if stepping around a sleeping animal. "Perhaps," he suggested, "the sisters are unwell. Perhaps someone should check on them." Father Roussel, old and half-deaf, listened with the patient calm of a man who had learned to protect his peace by refusing to hear anything dangerous. He nodded kindly. "The sisters are in excellent care," he said. "Mother Superior Thérèse is a capable woman. The climate here is harsh for women of delicate health. God will watch over them." But he did not visit the convent. He did not speak to the Mother Superior. He did not even consider the dark possibility that had taken hold in Guidry's mind. It was easier to believe in illness than in sin. By October of 1846, the truth refused to stay hidden. On the night of October 12, Sister Genevieve went into labor. Her cries cut through the warm night like the wail of a wounded animal. They echoed across the gardens and reached as far as the tree line. She was terrified and confused, a young woman who had taken vows believing she would never know such pain. Helena, the elderly enslaved woman who ran the kitchen, was summoned. She had delivered many babies in her life. She knew the sounds of labor too well. When she entered the room on the second floor, she saw 5 other sisters beside Genevieve. Their swollen bellies told the truth no one had dared to say aloud. This was not one sickness. This was not a single sin. This was a plague of secrets. The baby arrived just after midnight. A girl, light-skinned, with high cheekbones like Matthias and delicate hands like Sister Genevieve. 3 days later, another sister gave birth. By Christmas, 6 babies had been born within the convent walls. 4 girls and 2 boys. All healthy, all unmistakably mixed race, and all clearly connected to the same man. The convent called no doctor, no priest, no baptism was performed, no record was written in the courthouse. The babies simply appeared in the world like forbidden ghosts, wrapped in blankets cut from old altar cloths. The sisters tried to care for them, but nothing in their holy training had prepared them for crying infants. Their nights, once silent and disciplined, became filled with gasping wails and sleepless rocking. Through all of it, Matthias remained in the gardens. He repaired fences. He hauled wood. His face showed nothing, and yet the truth of his involvement clung to him like a shadow. By January of 1847, Mother Superior Therese knew something had to change. One morning she sent for Matthias. It was the first time she had spoken to him directly in nearly 2 years. He stood in her doorway, cap in hand, eyes lowered. "You understand the gravity of what has occurred," she said. Her voice did not shake. She did not ask a question. "Yes, ma'am," he answered. "These women swore vows before God. They surrendered the world and all earthly desires. What has happened here is not only sin. It is sacrilege." Matthias said nothing. What could he say? That he had never been asked. That he had never had power over his own body. That he had not chosen any of the encounters that led to this moment. None of those truths would matter to the woman staring at him. 6 children have been born, she continued. 6 more will arrive before summer. If the Archbishop learns of this, the convent will close. The sisters will be cast out in disgrace. The church will suffer a scandal that will stain its name for generations. She paused, studying him with a cold, tired expression. "You cannot remain here," she said. "Your presence is a reminder of what we have allowed to happen. But we cannot sell you. The risk is too great. Someone will ask questions. Someone will uncover the truth." Her voice dropped. "You are both the cause of our ruin and the one witness who must never speak." The solution she created was cruel but simple. Matthias would be moved to a tiny cabin at the far edge of the property. It sat deep in the cypress grove where the chapel bells sounded faint and distant. He would continue his work, but only at night or in the early dawn or during silent afternoons when the sisters hid indoors from the heat. He would become a ghost, a shadow, a man without a place to stand. But the babies posed a greater challenge. They could not stay in the convent forever. A house of holy women could not become a nursery filled with living evidence of secret sins. Something would have to be done with the children. Something permanent. Something the church would never admit. And as the days grew longer and the babies grew louder, the women of Sacred Mercy realized the true horror was not in what had happened. The true horror was in what they were now forced to consider. If you want, I can continue with part 3, or create titles, descriptions, hashtags, and thumbnails anytime. Part 3, rewritten with engaging hook. Engaging hook. Sometimes a secret is not buried. Sometimes it is only pushed underground long enough to rot, swell, and claw its way back up. And at Sacred Mercy Convent, the secret the sisters thought they had hidden was beginning to stir again. Not through whispers, not through rumors, but through consequences that refused to die. Part 3, The Silent Harvest. Children are not secrets. They are living proof. They cry. They grow. They ask questions. And eventually they demand the truth about where they came from. That single fact terrified Mother Superior Therese more than any punishment the church could give. A scandal might be buried, but 12 children wandering Louisiana would not stay small forever. So the Mother Superior crafted a plan that felt holy on the surface but was built on quiet deception. Over 18 long months she arranged for each newborn to be sent away from sacred mercy. Not discarded, because the Church forbade such cruelty, but delivered into the hands of families far enough away that their origins would never be suspected. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Mobile, Natchez. Saddle bags full of money went with them. Stories were invented. Some children were said to be from France. Some were said to be the children of dead mothers. Others were called the hidden mistakes of wealthy planters. Not one of those stories was true. But people tend to believe anything when money and the Church stand behind it. By August of 1848 the last child, a boy born to Sister Angelique, was sent away. The convent breathed again, at least on the outside. Mass was held on time. Lessons resumed for the daughters of planters. The gardens were tended, bells rang, windows glowed with candlelight, but peace is not the same thing as silence. And silence is not the same thing as forgiveness. The sisters were crumbling. They carried the memory of their sin like a fever that never broke. Sister Genevieve, the first to give birth, suffered migraines that put her in bed for days. Sister Marie Claire, once gentle and calm, stopped eating almost completely. Her ribs pressed against her skin like the bones of a starving bird. Young Sister Therese Madeleine scratched at her arms until they bled. She said she felt something crawling under her skin. She wrapped her sleeves tight to hide the scars, but everyone saw. No one spoke. They all prayed but none of them felt heard. And then there was Matthias. Banished to a lonely cabin deep in the trees. A man who had been used but never consulted, blamed but never defended. He lived like a ghost. He chopped wood at night. He worked the gardens before dawn. Days passed without the sound of his voice. He asked God if what had happened was punishment or protection. God did not answer. The sisters' guilt grew heavier with each moon. The silence in the convent thickened like mud. Something had to give. Something had to break. It broke in the form of a letter. Sister Jean Baptiste, the last to conceive and the most tormented of them all, started writing in the spring of 1850. She could not sleep. She could barely speak. But she could write. And she wrote everything. Not in French. Not in English. But in Latin, because Latin spoke to Rome. Her letter did not blame Matthias. She called him an instrument of providence or perhaps of our own collective madness. She did not claim demons. She did not blame the devil. She blamed them. She wrote the truth with the cold precision of a doctor describing a plague. She explained how it began. Sister Marie Therese, lonely and disillusioned, had been the first. The garden had brought her too close to Matthias. His gentleness confused her. His silence drew her in. One moment of weakness led to another. She confessed to Sister Angelique. Angelique sought Matthias next. The pattern spread through the convent like infection, moving cell to cell. 12 sisters. 12 transgressions. 12 children. Jean Baptiste wrote every detail. Her handwriting shook but never stopped. She sealed the letter. She prayed. And she gave it to a priest traveling back to New Orleans. A priest who read it before deciding what to do with it. A priest who realized how dangerous the truth was. A priest who took it not to Rome, but to the Archbishop. Father Armand Ebert did not send the letter. He handed the problem upward. And the Archbishop of New Orleans, Henri Marie Laurent, answered. He arrived at Sacred Mercy on October 20, 1850. A private carriage, only 2 priests with him. No public announcement, no bells, no warning. He did not sit down. He looked at the sisters the way a judge looks at 12 criminals waiting for sentencing. Mother Superior trembled as she answered his questions. Yes, the letter was truthful. Yes, all 12 sisters participated. Yes, the man Matthias was still on the property. Yes, the children had all been sent away. The Archbishop made notes. The Jesuit beside him wrote down every name of every child in every parish where they had been placed. They will need to be watched, the Archbishop said quietly. None of them must ever learn the truth. None of them must ever return. Then he studied the sisters one by one. Not with anger, not with pity, but with calculation. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. This matter will never leave this room. His meaning was clear. The Church would not seek justice. The church would seek silence. The meeting ended. The archbishop stepped outside the chapter house. A cold wind swept through the courtyard, though Louisiana rarely had cold winds in October. Some sisters claimed that when the archbishop passed by the garden, the air changed. That the cypress trees seemed to shiver. That the sky darkened for a moment as if something above was listening. Whether that was imagination or a sign of something darker, no one could say. But from that day forward, every sister at Sacred Mercy knew one truth. The church had buried their sin. But sins buried deep in the earth do not stay buried. Not forever. Not at Sacred Mercy. Engaging hook. Sometimes the darkest secrets do not die. They seep into the floorboards. They whisper through locked doors. And they return for those who thought they had buried them forever. At Sacred Mercy Convent, the silence the sisters created to hide their sin was becoming something alive. Something that watched. Something that waited. And now, in the cold turn of 1850, it was beginning to speak. Part 4. Night fell differently at Sacred Mercy now. It had a weight, a presence, as if the darkness itself had memory. The sisters tried to continue their routines. Prayers were spoken, lessons were taught, work was done in the gardens. But everyone felt the same thing, a chill that did not belong to the winter wind. The secret they had tried so hard to bury had begun to rot inside them. It touched their sleep first. Dreams came sharp and strange. Infants crying in distant rooms. A man's footsteps echoing in the corridors. A voice whispering from the chapel walls in a language they could not understand. It was not Matthias's voice, yet it carried his grief. Sister Genevieve was the first to break. She woke from a nightmare one night screaming so loudly that the entire dormitory rushed to her bedside. She was shaking so hard her teeth knocked together. In her dream the children they had abandoned were standing at the foot of her bed. Their faces were blurred like smudged paint and each one held out tiny hands covered in river mud. "You left us, we know what you did." Those were the only words she could gasp before she fainted again. The next morning Mother Superior Therese told everyone it had only been exhaustion. But the other sisters did not believe it. They had heard the fear in Genevieve's voice. They had seen the way she clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles had turned white. 2 nights later it was Sister Marie Claire. She rose from her bed in the middle of the night and walked down the hallway as if sleepwalking. Sister Jean-Baptiste followed her quietly. Marie Claire stopped in the courtyard and stared at the garden shed where everything had begun. Her lips were moving. Jean stepped closer. Marie Claire was praying, but not like any prayer Jean had heard. It was broken fragments, half sentences, and her voice trembled as if she were begging someone who stood right beside her. "Forgive me, please forgive me, do not take my soul." Jean touched her shoulder. Marie Claire spun around and Jean saw something in her eyes, a wildness that did not belong to her. "Someone is watching us," Marie Claire whispered. "I can feel him every night. I feel him at the end of my bed." Jean tried to calm her, but Marie Claire only fell to her knees sobbing until Jean had to drag her back inside. Mother Superior ordered more prayers, more fasting, more silence, but it only made the tension worse. Their bottled fear grew thicker each day. The truth is that the vow of silence did not protect them anymore. It trapped them with their guilt. Matthias felt the change too. His cabin at the edge of the property had always been quiet, but now the air carried a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. He had done his best to disappear from the sisters' daily lives. He kept his head down, worked from dawn until the last light. But it did not matter. The past followed him like a shadow. Some nights he heard footsteps outside his door. Slow, dragging, patient. When he opened the door, no one was there. Once he saw a shape standing between the trees. A small shape. A child perhaps. But when he blinked it vanished into the darkness as if it had never existed. He wondered if his mind was failing. Or if God had finally decided to remind him of every sin he had been forced to commit. Sometimes he prayed. Sometimes he simply sat in silence watching the moon rise over the sugarcane fields, knowing sleep would not come. Inside the convent walls tension curled like smoke. Sister Therese Madeleine, normally calm and quiet, began to scratch her own arms again. This time she whispered as she did it. Jean overheard her one morning as she stood outside the infirmary. "It is under my skin," she murmured. I can feel it moving. It knows me. Mother Superior refused to let anyone speak openly about what was happening. She believed that words would give the fear more power. But the fear already had power. Too much. By late November of 1850 the atmosphere inside Sacred Mercy had become unbearable. Even the laywomen who worked in the kitchens noticed it. They whispered among themselves saying the sisters looked haunted. Saying they had seen dark figures moving in the halls at night. Saying they heard the sound of a baby crying from the old chapel. No one dared ask questions. One evening during Vespers a candle suddenly extinguished itself without a breeze. Then another, and another. Soon half the chapel was swallowed by shadow though the doors were shut and the air was perfectly still. Sister Angelique dropped her hymnal and backed away from the altar. Someone is here, she choked out. Right here with us. Her voice echoed through the chapel loud in the silence they had forced upon themselves for years. Mother Superior snapped at her to be quiet but the panic spread instantly. Several sisters clutched their veils. One fainted. Another began to pray loudly, breaking the last fragile rule that had held their community together. Later that night something happened that the sisters could not ignore. Sister Marie-Thérèse, the first to break her vows, walked into the laundry house where the well stood. She carried a lantern and her rosary. Jean found her standing at the edge of the stone well staring down into the black water. He is down there, she whispered. Watching me. Waiting for me to join him. Jean grabbed her arm. Marie-Thérèse resisted so violently that she nearly fell forward into the well before Jean pulled her back. Jean's voice trembled as she cried out for help. Marie-Thérèse kept repeating the same sentence over and over. He wants me. He wants all of us. By morning the sisters realized the truth. Their secret was no longer something hidden. It had become something alive. Something that wanted justice or revenge or maybe something far worse. And whatever it was, it had only just begun. If you want part 5, just tell me. Continue with part 5. Engaging hook. Some secrets haunt a place forever. Some grow roots. Some learn to whisper names in the night. At Sacred Mercy Convent the darkness was no longer just fear. It had a voice. It had intentions. And now it wanted the sisters to pay for what they had done. Part 5. By the winter of 1850 the gardens of Sacred Mercy lay dead beneath the cold wind. Brown vines twisted over the fences. The tool shed stood silent and empty, though every sister felt the same uneasy truth. It did not feel empty at all. The air inside the convent had changed again. It was heavier now and full of things that could not be spoken. Mother Superior tried to hold the community together with prayer and fasting, but even she knew the old discipline had lost its power. The sisters moved through their duties with hollow eyes. They slept in short, terrified bursts. They jumped at small sounds. And worst of all, every night someone else heard the same thing. A child crying, sometimes close, sometimes far, sometimes inside their own cells. Sister Genevieve heard it almost every night. One evening she woke to the soft sound of tiny footsteps moving across the dormitory floor. When she sat up in bed her breath caught in her chest. A small figure stood at the far end of the room. She could not see its face, only the faint outline of a child no taller than her hip. When she blinked the figure faded into the dark and the footsteps stopped. She curled beneath her blanket and cried until morning. Sister Marie-Claire grew weaker each day. She ate almost nothing. Her eyes looked dark and sunken. She whispered prayers constantly as if trying to drown out the sounds no one else could hear. One afternoon Jean-Baptiste found her standing in front of the garden gate gripping the wooden slats so hard her knuckles had turned white. "They are calling me," Marie-Claire whispered. "I hear them in the vines. I hear them in the wind." Jean tried to move her but Marie-Claire would not let go of the gate until Jean began to pray out loud. Only then did she loosen her hands and allow herself to be led back inside. The fear spread quickly. Even Matthias felt it. His nights were the worst. He heard knocking on his cabin door though no one ever stood outside. Some nights the window shutters shook violently even when the air was still. Once he woke to a soft hush inside his room. When he lit his lantern there was no one there, but his blanket looked as if small hands had pressed into it. He had long stopped trying to understand whether the presence was real or whether his mind was breaking after years of silence and guilt. All he knew was that something had shifted. The land itself seemed restless. Inside the convent the sisters were reaching their limit. One night during compline Sister Angelique suddenly froze in the aisle. Her eyes fixed on the choir loft above. Jean followed her gaze. At first she saw nothing but shadows. Then a darker shadow moved across the loft railing and the faint creak of a wooden step echoed through the chapel. Sister Angelique screamed and ran out of the room. Her cry sent panic through the entire group. Several sisters fell to their knees. Others clung to one another shaking violently. Mother Superior stepped forward trying to restore order, but even she looked pale. Later that night the panic turned into something worse. Sister Therese Madeleine vanished. Her bed was untouched, her cloak missing, her shoes gone. Jean, who slept nearest to her, had not heard a single sound even though she had been awake for most of the night listening to the faint cries drifting through the walls. The sisters searched the convent by candlelight. They checked the chapel, the corridors, the laundry house, the garden shed. The night felt colder than usual. The wind seemed to push against them instead of around them. Finally they found tracks leading toward the edge of the property where Matthias lived. Mother Superior ordered the group to stay together as they followed the faint footprints through the frost-covered grass. Jean felt her stomach twist. A terrible thought crept into her mind. What if the presence had not been haunting them? What if it had been calling them one by one? The tracks led to the forest line. There in the moonlight they found Sister Therese Madeleine standing barefoot among the trees. Her arms hung at her sides. Her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Jean called her name. Therese did not move. Mother Superior stepped forward carefully. Her candle flickered in the wind. Therese finally turned her head. Her eyes looked swollen and terrified, but also strangely empty. She whispered one sentence. "They want us to come back." Jean felt her heart drop. "Come back where?" she asked. Therese raised her hand and pointed toward the well behind the laundry house. Her fingers shook violently. She looked like she might collapse. "They live there now," she said. "Below the water, waiting for us to join them." The sisters gasped. Some began to whisper prayers through trembling lips. Marie-Claire covered her mouth with both hands as if trying not to scream. Mother Superior tried to take Therese's arm but Therese pulled away with sudden strength that shocked everyone. She backed deeper into the trees. "We abandoned them," she cried. "We sent them away. We told everyone they were gone but they were never gone. They never left." Her voice cracked. She fell to her knees and pressed her hands to her skull as if trying to block out a sound too awful to bear. Jean rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Therese, pulling her out of the trees. Therese struggled weakly before collapsing against Jean's shoulder, sobbing like a frightened child. The group carried her back to the convent, but fear followed them like a shadow. That night no one slept. Everyone gathered in the chapter house waiting for Mother Superior to speak. Her face looked grim and older than Jean had ever seen it. "Something is happening here," Mother Superior said with a voice that trembled despite her efforts. "Something we can no longer ignore or control." Sister Angelique stood in the corner shaking. Marie-Claire sat on the floor staring at nothing. Therese Madeleine rocked back and forth whispering to herself. Jean felt a cold certainty rising inside her. Their past was no longer buried. Their sins had taken shape. And whatever was haunting Sacred Mercy was growing stronger. Stronger and closer. By morning the sisters knew the truth. The darkness was not going to stop. It wanted something from them. And soon it would come inside the convent to claim it. If you want part 6, just say, "Continue with part 6. Engaging hook. The walls of Sacred Mercy had always been silent. Now they breathed. Now they listened. Now they whispered the names of the sisters in the dark. And the thing that haunted the convent was no longer hiding. It had begun to choose who would fall next. Part 6. By the time the sun rose after Therese Madeleine's terrifying outburst, the convent felt different. The early morning bell rang through the courtyard, but not a single sister moved toward the chapel. No one dared walk alone. They gathered instead in the chapter house waiting for Mother Superior, who looked as though she had not slept at all. Her voice was steady but thin as she spoke. "We have allowed fear to rule over us. Something is disturbing our home and our spirits, but we must remain faithful. We will not run and we will not let terror swallow us." Jean knew the words were meant to calm the group, but even she could see the truth. The sisters were unraveling. They had been for months. Guilt had eaten their strength. Shame had broken their peace. And now something unseen had taken advantage of their fear. Sister Genevieve sat closest to the fireplace, hugging her knees to her chest. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She whispered she heard tiny voices during the night coming from the cracks in the walls. They kept saying the same word over and over. Come. Marie Claire looked nearly lifeless. Her head rested against the wooden wall and her eyes were half open. Jean watched her lips moving. Silently. It almost looked like she was responding to someone. By mid-morning the sisters gathered for prayer in the chapel. The air felt cold inside even though the day outside was warm. The candles on the altar flickered strangely as if touched by a soft breath. Jean sat in the pews and tried to focus on the rosary, but her fingers trembled. During the second prayer, Sister Angelique suddenly gasped. She pressed a hand to her throat and stared toward the choir loft. Jean followed her gaze. For a moment all she saw were shadows. Then she noticed something. A faint shape. Small. Childlike. Standing at the edge of the loft railing. Jean blinked and the figure vanished. Angelique stood up so fast her bench scraped loudly against the floor. The sound echoed through the chapel like a scream. Mother Superior rose and hurried to her side, but Angelique backed away, shaking violently. They are here, she whispered. All of them. They walk among us. The chapel fell silent. Every sister felt the same icy pressure in the air. Something lingered around them, watching them, pressing into their thoughts like cold fingers. After prayer, Mother Superior ordered everyone to remain together for the rest of the day. They worked in pairs, cleaning the kitchen, organizing the classroom, sweeping the hallways, always checking over their shoulders. Even the smallest noise caused someone to flinch. Jean watched Matthias from a distance as he carried firewood to the storeroom. He looked tired and older than she remembered. When their eyes met, he paused. He seemed to know something had changed. As if the land around the convent carried messages that only he could hear. That evening he came to the back entrance and waited until Jean approached. It is worse now, he said in a low, trembling voice. I hear them speaking. Many voices. They whisper when the night comes. They are angry. Jean swallowed hard. Could guilt truly take shape? Could the memory of their sins grow strong enough to become something living? Something that followed them. Something that would not forgive them. Before she could respond, a scream tore through the courtyard. High-pitched. Full of terror. It was Sister Genevieve. The sisters ran toward the dormitory. Their steps pounded through the halls. They found her curled on the floor outside her room, holding her head and crying as if she were a child. They were in my room, she sobbed. They sat on my bed. I felt the mattress sink. I felt their hands, cold and small. Mother Superior knelt beside her, but Genevieve pulled away, screaming, do not touch me. She scrambled back against the wall, breathing hard. Her eyes were wide with panic. They want us. They said we belong to them. Her voice broke and she began to shake uncontrollably. That night no one slept. Mother Superior ordered all the sisters to remain in the chapter house again. They sat together with candles burning in the center of the room, as if the small circle of light could protect them. The wind outside grew louder. The window shutters banged against the walls. Jean felt something watching them from the corridor. She kept turning her head, but each time she saw only darkness. Around midnight, Sister Therese Madeleine stood suddenly. Her face looked pale and stiff. Jean felt her chest tighten. There was something wrong. Therese moved as if she were sleepwalking. Where are you going? Jean whispered. Therese stared at the door. They are calling me. Mother Superior reached for her arm, but Therese stepped back. The room felt colder. The candles flickered wildly. Jean saw a shadow move across the floor even though nothing stood near the light. It slid toward Therese like a long dark hand. Before anyone could react, Therese turned and ran out of the room. Mother Superior shouted after her, and the sisters followed in a panic. The candle flames blew out behind them as they ran. The convent halls echoed with their footsteps and with something else. Soft pattering sounds, like many small feet following from the walls. The sisters raced outside into the courtyard and saw Therese running toward the well behind the laundry house. The moon lit the scene with a pale, cold glow. The wind blew her hair wildly around her face. Stop! Mother Superior cried. Therese, do not go near it. But Therese did not stop. She reached the well and placed her hands on the stone rim. Her breath came out in sharp trembles. Jean felt dread rise inside her so strong that her knees almost gave out. She ran forward as fast as she could. Therese leaned over the opening. Her voice came out thin and distant. "They want us home." Suddenly she screamed. A long raw scream that ripped through the night. Jean grabbed her shoulders just in time, pulling her away from the edge. Therese collapsed into her arms sobbing. "Something touched me," she cried. "Something from below." The sisters surrounded them terrified. Mother Superior looked at the well with horror in her eyes. For the first time she seemed truly afraid. "Whatever is in this place," she whispered, "it has awakened." They carried Therese back inside, but Jean did not forget the feeling she had sensed in that moment by the well. Something had reached up from the dark. Something had tried to pull Therese down. Something not human. Something born from the sins buried beneath sacred mercy. And it was no longer content to whisper. It wanted to take them one by one. If you want part 7, just say, "Continue with part 7. Part 7: The Echo in the Attic. Engaging hook. Sometimes fear does not come from what you see. Sometimes it comes from what you hear when you are completely alone. And tonight, the people inside Briarwood learned that some sounds do not belong to the living. Part 7. Samuel could not sleep. The events of the past nights kept circling in his mind like a storm that had no end. The sheriff's warnings, the strange symbols on the walls, the shadow in the barn, and the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Every part of it felt tied together, like pieces of a puzzle that no one in the town dared to put together. Outside, the wind pushed through the trees with a long low cry. It sounded almost human. Samuel sat up in his bed. For a moment he thought he heard a soft tapping above him. He stared at the ceiling. The tapping came again. It was slow and careful, like fingernails brushing against old wood. Samuel took a deep breath and stepped out of bed. He lit a small oil lamp and held it tight as he walked toward the hallway. The rest of the house was dark and silent. His mother was asleep. His father was away working at the mill headquarters in the next county. The only light came from Samuel's lamp, glowing softly along the walls. The tapping continued above him. The attic. Samuel climbed the narrow steps that led upward. Each step groaned under his weight. At the top, he pushed open the attic door. Dust rose into the air. The room was filled with old trunks, broken furniture, and forgotten belongings covered in sheets. The tapping stopped. Samuel raised his lamp higher. Shadows stretched across the room. His eyes scanned every corner. Nothing moved. Then he heard breathing. It was not his own. Samuel froze. The breathing was slow and heavy, coming from behind an old wardrobe on the far side of the attic. The wardrobe door was slightly open, as if someone had closed it in a hurry. Samuel stepped closer. The breathing grew louder. He reached for the door. Before he could touch it, the wardrobe shook violently. Samuel stumbled backward, dropping the lamp. The flame flickered but did not go out. A voice came from inside the wardrobe. It was whispering. The words were soft and broken, like someone trying to speak after years of silence. "Help me. Please help me." Samuel's heart slammed against his ribs. He knew that voice. It belonged to Eleanor Finch, the girl who had disappeared from Briarwood 5 years earlier. People said she ran away. Others said she died in the woods. No one knew the truth. But Samuel did. She was right here, or something that sounded like her was right here. The wardrobe door slowly creaked open. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. The whispers stopped. The breathing faded. Samuel stepped closer again. The inside of the wardrobe was empty. Completely empty. There was no sign of anyone living or dead. He backed away, confused and shaking. As he turned to leave the attic, the temperature dropped so fast that Samuel could see his breath in the air. The lamp flickered again. A low voice came from behind him. "She is not alone." Samuel spun around. A tall shadow stood near the window. It had no face. Its body was thin and stretched, like ink running down a page. It stared at Samuel with its empty form. Samuel ran. He burst out of the attic and slammed the door shut. The hallway lights flickered even though no one touched the switches. Samuel rushed into his room and locked the door. He leaned against it, gasping for air. But the whispers followed him. They seeped through the walls, soft and cold, circling him like smoke. "They took her. They took all of us. Samuel covered his ears. The whispering grew louder. He grabbed the lamp and held it close to his chest. A strange pressure filled the room, as if something invisible was pushing against him. Suddenly the whispers stopped. A loud knock hit his window. Samuel gasped and turned. Standing outside the window was Eleanor Finch. Her skin was pale and cracked. Her eyes were dark and empty. Dirt clung to her hands as if she had crawled out of the earth. She pressed her palm against the glass. "Run, Samuel. Run before they find you too." Samuel screamed for help. His mother rushed into the room. She turned on the lamp beside his bed. The window was empty. There was no Eleanor, no shadow, no whispering. His mother held him tightly and asked what he saw. Samuel tried to speak, but the words were stuck in his throat. He could only point at the window. His mother closed the curtains and told him he had a bad dream. But Samuel knew the truth. He was wide awake, and something had come for him. Later that night, Samuel could not sleep again. He sat by the window, staring out at the dark fields. The moon hung low, lighting the tall grass. Then he saw movement. A line of figures walked across the field. They moved slowly, in perfect silence. Their bodies were thin and pale. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. The missing people of Briarwood. Eleanor walked among them. Samuel's heart raced. The figures stopped at the edge of the field. They all turned toward his house at the same time. Then Samuel saw a taller figure standing behind them. It was the same shadow from the attic. Only now it was larger, darker, and watching him with its faceless form. The figures lifted their arms and pointed at Samuel's window. The shadow raised its head as if claiming him. Samuel stumbled backward. He knew there was no going back to normal life. Whatever had taken Eleanor and the others had now set its eyes on him. He understood something else too. The townspeople were not wrong. Briarwood had a secret, a deep one, a living one, and Samuel had just become part of it. If you want part 8, just say, part 8. Part 8. The night the town stopped breathing. Engaging hook. Every town has one night. People do not talk about. One night when the air changes, the wind dies, and even God seems to look away. For Briarwood, that night had finally come. Part 8. The morning after Samuel saw the line of pale figures in the field, Briarwood felt strangely quiet. People walked through the streets with soft steps, as if they sensed something watching them from above. The air felt heavier, thicker, almost like the sky was pressing down on the town. Even the birds seemed afraid to sing. Samuel barely spoke during breakfast. His mother kept glancing at him, worried. She asked again if he wanted her to send for the doctor, but Samuel shook his head. He did not need a doctor. He needed answers. After the meal, Samuel walked to town. He kept looking at the woods, expecting the pale figures to appear again. Every rustle of leaves made his skin crawl. The deeper he walked, the more uneasy he felt. The town square was nearly empty. Only a few shop doors were open, and the owners stood outside as if afraid to go in. An old man sweeping his porch paused and whispered to Samuel. "You saw them, did you not?" Samuel froze. "Who?" "The ones who walk at night." The old man leaned closer. His voice trembled. "You are not the first boy to see them. But you might be the last." Before Samuel could ask more, the old man hurried inside and locked his door. Samuel stood there feeling cold inside his chest. People had known. They always knew. They just pretended they did not. As he reached the sheriff's office, he noticed the windows were covered from the inside. A sign hung crooked on the door. "Closed until further notice." The decision felt strange and sudden. Sheriff Dalton was not a man who hid. Samuel felt a presence behind him. When he turned, he saw Mr. Whitlock, the schoolteacher. His face looked pale and his eyes were sunken, as if he had not slept for days. "Samuel, come with me," Mr. Whitlock said quietly. "We need to talk." Samuel followed him to the old schoolhouse. The building felt abandoned though it was only noon. Whitlock locked the door behind them. He brought Samuel to the back room and lit a lamp. "What I am about to tell you is what the town elders refused to speak about," Whitlock said. "It began long before you were born." Samuel listened closely as Whitlock continued. "Every 20 years, something awakens beneath Briarwood. It is older than the town. Older than the land records. Older than anything our people can explain. Whitlock's voice shook. When it awakens, it calls to the weak, the lonely, the forgotten. They follow it. They vanish. Like Eleanor, Samuel whispered. Whitlock nodded. She was not the first. The town covered it up to avoid panic. But this time is different. The awakening came early. And it is stronger. The lamp flickered. A soft vibration moved through the floorboards, like something shifting deep underground. Samuel felt his breath catch. Can we stop it? Whitlock hesitated. There is a way, but it is dangerous. And it requires someone it has already marked. Samuel realized what that meant. Him. Whitlock pulled out an old journal with cracked leather skin. This belonged to Reverend Josiah Hale, he said. He wrote about the First Awakening in 1865. He tried to stop it but failed. He died for it, but we have his notes. Samuel opened the journal. Inside were drawings of the pale figures he had seen. Drawings of the shadow from the attic. Drawings of strange symbols carved on stones. On one page, in dark ink, were the words. The one marked must enter the heart of the earth. Samuel understood. Somehow he would have to go underground. Into whatever lived there. Before he could speak, the schoolhouse walls shuddered as if a giant hand had brushed against them. The lamp went out. Silence filled the room. A cold silence. One that felt alive. Then came the whisper. It slid through the building like a snake through grass. We see you. Whitlock grabbed Samuel's arm. Do not answer it. But the whisper spoke again, louder, closer. Samuel, come home. Whitlock lit another lamp with shaking fingers. The room brightened just in time for them to see a pale hand press against the window. Then another. Then many more. The missing people were surrounding the schoolhouse. Whitlock hurried Samuel to the back exit. But before they reached it, a shadow stretched across the floor and rose in front of them. Tall, faceless, breathing without lungs. Samuel froze. His knees weakened. This was the same thing that stood in the attic. The same thing that commanded the missing people. It towered over him, thin and dark like a stain on the world. Whitlock stepped in front of Samuel. You will not take him. Not this boy. The shadow tilted its head, almost amused. Whitlock's lamp flickered wildly, then burst in his hand. Whitlock shouted and fell backward. Samuel grabbed him and pulled him up. We have to run. They pushed through the back door and stumbled into the woods. Behind them, the pale figures began moving, slow but unstoppable. Their feet made no sound on the ground. Whitlock held his burnt hand close to his chest. We need to reach the old well, he said. It is the entrance Hale wrote about. The woods were dark even in daylight. Branches cracked behind them. Whispers drifted through the trees. Samuel ran faster. His lungs burned. But he did not stop until the old stone well appeared in a clearing. The well was covered in vines and thyme, its edges cracked, its opening wide enough to swallow a man whole. Whitlock pulled away the vines and revealed a symbol carved into the stone. Samuel had seen it before. It was the same symbol that appeared in his attic. This is it, Whitlock said. This is where the truth is buried. Samuel stepped closer to the well. The air rising from inside was cold as winter breath. Whitlock looked at him. Samuel, once you go down there, you may not come back. But you might be the only one who can end this. Samuel swallowed hard. Behind him, the pale figures stepped into the clearing. The shadow rose behind them like a dark king. Samuel climbed onto the edge of the well. He looked down into the darkness. And jumped. If you want part 9, just say part 9. Part 9: The Descent into the Hollow Earth. Engaging hook. Some places are dark because sunlight cannot reach them. Other places are dark because something inside them does not want to be seen. Samuel was about to enter the second kind. Part 9. The fall into the well felt endless. Samuel dropped through the cold air for what felt like minutes, though it was only seconds. His hands scraped against the rough stone walls until he found a thick root sticking out. He grabbed it and stopped his fall just before he would have hit the ground. He dangled there, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. Slowly he lowered himself the rest of the way and landed on solid ground. It was damp, cold. The air smelled like old earth and something else. Something sweet and rotten. Samuel looked up. The opening of the well was now a small white circle far above him. Pale figures leaned over the edge. Whitlock's face appeared among them. He looked terrified. "Samuel," Whitlock called down. "If you hear me, follow the tunnel. The journal says the creature hides its heart deep underground. That is what you must destroy." Samuel nodded even though he was not sure Whitlock could see him. He turned toward the only path leading away from the bottom of the well. A narrow tunnel stretched forward into darkness. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The walls were made of packed earth and stone. Every sound echoed. His every breath, his every step. The air felt thick and heavy like he was breathing through a cloth. After several minutes, he began to hear something behind him. Something like slow footsteps. But when he turned around there was nothing there. Only darkness. Samuel hurried his pace. The tunnel opened into a wide cavern lit by a strange glow. It came from the walls themselves, as if the stone held trapped moonlight waiting to escape. Samuel felt a strange chill as he stepped inside. Then he saw the carvings. The walls were covered in symbols. The same symbols he had seen in the attic. The same symbol carved on the well. Some were shaped like eyes. Some looked like hands reaching upward. Some looked like twisted figures kneeling. Samuel reached out to touch one of them. The stone felt warm, almost alive. A whisper drifted through the cavern. "Samuel." He spun around. No one was there. But the whisper came again. This time from the far end of the cavern. "Samuel, come." The voice was soft and deep, like it was made of wind and sorrow. Samuel walked toward it. The cavern narrowed into another passage. As he moved forward, he began to hear a low humming sound. It vibrated through the stone and through his bones. It grew louder and louder until it felt like the ground itself was breathing. The passage opened into a vast chamber. Samuel gasped when he saw it. Dozens of pale figures stood inside. Men, women, children, some from recent disappearances, some from long ago. They were not dead. Their eyes moved, their heads turned, but they were not alive in the way they had been before. They stood like puppets waiting for strings to pull. At the center of the chamber was something else. A tall, thin figure made of shadow. Taller than it had seemed on the surface. Its body shimmered like smoke rising from fire. Its eyes were two holes filled with darkness. The thing spoke again. "You came." Samuel's hands trembled. "What are you?" The shadow leaned forward. "I am older than your town. Older than your land. I am the hunger beneath your feet." Samuel backed away but the shadow moved closer. The humming sound grew louder. The pale figures began to sway like reeds in the wind. "You were marked," the creature continued. "From the moment you stepped into the attic. You saw me because I chose to be seen. You came here because I called you." "Why me?" Samuel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because you are afraid," the creature said. "And fear is a door." The humming stopped. The silence that followed was so sudden and deep that Samuel felt pressure in his ears. Then the creature pointed toward the far end of the chamber. Samuel followed its gaze. There was a heart. Not a human heart. Not an animal heart. Something far larger. It was made of stone and veins. It pulsed slowly, sending waves of faint red light through the chamber. Each pulse made the pale figures sway more. Made the shadow creature grow brighter. "That is my heart," the creature said. "And you will not touch it." Samuel felt something stir inside him. Not courage but something that felt like duty. He took a step toward the heart. The pale figures suddenly moved in unison. They turned toward him. Their eyes glowed faintly. The first one to step forward was Eleanor. Her face was pale and emotionless. But her eyes held something Samuel recognized. A tiny spark of her old self. He took a step closer. "Eleanor, it is me, Samuel. Please wake up." Her lips moved but no words came. Instead her hand lifted toward him. For a moment Samuel thought she was reaching out for help. Then her fingers curled like claws. She struck. Samuel dodged and stumbled backward as the other pale figures began to move. Their motions were jerky and unnatural. They walked toward him with slow steps that grew faster. The shadow creature laughed. The sound rattled the chamber. Samuel ran toward the heart. The pale figures chased him. Their footsteps were silent but their presence was heavy. Samuel jumped over a stone ridge and reached the heart. Heat radiated from it. The surface pulsed like living flesh. He grabbed a loose rock from the ground and raised it above his head. The shadow creature roared. The cavern shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Samuel slammed the rock into the heart. A crack appeared. A bright red light burst from inside. The pale figures froze. Their heads jerked violently. The creature screamed. Samuel struck again. The crack widened. Light poured out in blinding waves. One more strike. The heart exploded in a burst of red and white light. Samuel was thrown backward into the cavern wall. His ears rang. His vision blurred. The light filled the entire chamber. The shadow creature began to dissolve like smoke caught in a storm. Its body twisted. Its scream turned into a whisper. "You have opened the door." Then it was gone. The pale figures collapsed. Samuel crawled toward Eleanor. She lay still, her eyes closed, her skin turning warm again. Above him the cavern began to tremble. The earth was starting to collapse. Samuel knew one thing. He needed to get out. Now, if you want part 10, the final part, just say part 10. Part 10. The silence that followed. Engaging hook. Some secrets refuse to die. Some truths are buried so deep that even the earth trembles when they are disturbed. What happens when the shadows are gone and only the silence remains? Part 10. Samuel emerged from the cavern into the first light of dawn. The forest was quiet, but the air felt heavy, as though it carried the memory of everything he had seen. He was covered in dust, sweat, and blood, but he was alive. The hollow earth had released him. The shadow creature had been destroyed, but he could still feel its presence lingering in the soil and the roots, in the old stones that had been carved with secrets older than the town itself. Eleanor stirred beside him, coughing as she breathed the fresh air. Her eyes opened slowly. They were clear, alive. She looked at Samuel as if waking from a dream, but in her gaze there was a terror that matched his own. She did not speak. Words could not describe what they had both witnessed. Together they climbed the slope of the cypress grove, finding their way to the path that led back to the old convent grounds. The morning mist clung to the moss-draped trees, softening the landscape that only hours before had been the stage for horror beyond imagination. Samuel felt a shiver run through him. Even now he could hear faint whispers on the wind, echoes of the pale figures, whispers that seemed to beg him to remember, to tell someone, to never let the story die. When they arrived at the convent, it was deserted. The buildings were still. The windows reflected the rising sun. There was no sign of Mother Superior Therese or the 12 sisters. Nothing had been left behind except the faint smell of candle wax and old flowers. The children were gone. Every trace of the years of suffering and secrecy had vanished as though it had never existed. Samuel stepped inside the chapel. Dust covered the pews and the altar, but he could feel the weight of prayers long offered, the echoes of voices chanting matins and compline. He knelt for a moment, offering thanks not only for survival but for the opportunity to see the truth exposed, if only for himself. He wondered how many others had been forced to carry such secrets and how many more remained hidden beneath the cypress swamps, under centuries of silence and fear. Outside, Eleanor shook herself awake. "We have to leave," she said. Her voice was steady now, but there was no mistaking the terror she had endured. "They will come. Others will come for the story, and we cannot let them find it. Some things are meant to remain buried." Samuel nodded. He had thought about the journal of Sister Jean Baptiste, the letters never sent to Rome, the fragments hidden in private collections. He thought about Whitlock, Father Roussel, and even the Archbishop who had ordered the secrecy. All of them had participated in erasing history, in hiding the sins and the tragedies of sacred mercy. He realized that the story was not only about the convent, or Matthias, or the 12 sisters. It was about silence, about the lengths people will go to protect reputations, institutions, and power. They walked away from the convent, leaving behind the ruins and the memories. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows that twisted among the cypress roots. Samuel looked back once. The building seemed smaller now, almost fragile, and the horror it had contained felt distant, yet it would never leave him. He knew that memory was not a place you could escape. Weeks passed. Samuel and Eleanor returned to the small town where the journey had begun, but nothing felt the same. The people, the streets, even the church seemed strange to him now. He carried with him fragments of the story, whispers of the children's fates, and the names of the 12 sisters whose lives had been destroyed and hidden. He felt compelled to preserve it, not for fame or reward, but to give the lost some measure of acknowledgement. In secret, he began writing. Every detail, every name, every moment he could remember. He wrote about Matthias, about the cruelty and the injustice, about the sisters trapped by their vows and the system that had silenced them. He wrote about the shadow creature, the hollow earth, and the pale figures who had suffered in silence. He wrote until the ink ran dry, until his hands ached, until the words themselves seemed to tremble on the page. He sent copies to no one. Some pages were hidden under floorboards, some were buried beneath the roots of trees, and some were sewn into the lining of his coat. Samuel had learned that some truths were too dangerous for the world. Some secrets, even when known, demanded caution. Years later, the convent fell into ruin. Locals whispered about it, about the strange disappearances, about the cypress groves that seemed to swallow anyone who ventured too close. Children told stories of shadows in the trees and voices calling at night. But no one could tell the full truth. Not because they did not try, but because the earth itself seemed to have absorbed the memory, holding it tight in the dark, moist soil. Samuel lived the rest of his life quietly, carrying the burden of knowledge. He visited the graves of those who had passed, prayed for the living, and remembered Matthias, the man who had been both victim and witness, whose life had been taken and used without consent. He never married, never had children, but he told Eleanor that the story had to survive. That even if it could not be shared widely, even if only a handful of people ever learned it, truth was a flame that could never be entirely extinguished. When he finally died, he left behind the fragments of his journal. Some were discovered decades later, carefully catalogued by historians, but always surrounded by speculation, disbelief, and scandal. The convent, the shadow, the children, the 12 sisters, and Matthias became legend and horror intertwined, a story that haunted Louisiana, whispered in the swamps, and buried in the memory of the land. Even now, long after the trees have grown taller and the cypress roots have shifted, some swear that if you wander near the ruins of Sacred Mercy at dusk, you can hear the faintest echo of chanting, the soft cry of children, and the whisper of a story the world has tried to forget. Samuel's final lesson was simple. Some truths are terrifying, some histories are horrifying, but the human soul demands acknowledgement, even if the world refuses it. Secrets may try to bury themselves beneath centuries of silence, but the right witness, the right moment, and the right courage can force them to the surface. The shadows are gone, the hearts are free, but the silence that follows is heavy, and it will always remind us that some stories are never meant to be comfortable. If you want more stories that reveal the hidden truths and forgotten horrors of history, hit the subscribe button, share this story with friends who love the mysterious and macabre, and leave a comment telling me what part of this story haunted you the most. Your curiosity keeps these stories alive.